Well, hello everyone, and welcome to ADMG 475, Executing Project Management Level 2, Chapter 12 discussion. Chapter 12, let's look at the reading for this week. Chapter 12 is all about project supply chain management, and it corresponds to the PMBOK Chapter 12, project procurement management. So according to the PMBOK, project procurement management processes include planning, procurement management, no big surprise there. We always plan before we do in all of our knowledge areas. And then we have conduct procurements, control procurements, and close procurements. Let's see what some of this looks like. So procurement management, what is it? It is all about obtaining goods and services from suppliers outside of the organization. So typically all of the work we have talked about so far has been inside the organization. Our own people, we have our resources have pretty much been our own people that we have used to do things. Now we need a caterer. We probably need a caterer. We're probably going to need a venue, and we are probably going to need a string quartet and a band. And there are a number of things or goods or services that we are going to need to obtain from outside of the organization, and that's where supplier management or project procurement management comes into play. And you often hear supplier management and procurement management in the same context. Oftentimes they share virtually the same concerns and the same issues and the same processes that are involved. And it's really about contracting for these goods and services and managing those contracts to make sure that the quality expectations are there. We, again, often refer to it as supplier management, supply chain management, procurement management, very similar phrases for the same level of work. So some of the important concepts that you want to make sure you understand: the make-buy decision when you are looking at whether you are going to obtain services from outside of the organization or obtain services from inside the organization. You are making a decision whether you are going to make internally or buy externally. It's a make-buy decision. And it's important to understand that there are pros and cons in both directions, and it's also a very important process to go through to evaluate whether it's good to go outside or better to go outside in that particular circumstance. A lot of times you go outside because you don't have that piece of equipment you need, or you don't have the skill set on staff, or you don't have something. So typically we go outside because we have a lack of something, and it forces us to have to contract or procure the goods or services outside. Or other times it's just more cost efficient or more expedient. Say, for example, it takes us 4 weeks to make something, and we can go to the supplier and we can have it in a week. So there are some times when there are a number of different reasons that we enter into that make-buy, that we end up going outside and buying, and we use the make-buy decision process to determine that. When we do go outside, there are a variety of contract types. We're going to talk about contract types in a minute. And it's often considered a good idea that you create an environment that is collaborative and cooperative with your suppliers. We tend to see teaming efforts that go on with our suppliers rather than kind of a boss or adversarial type relationships. Things like systems integration, what does that mean, and what are some of the challenges of integrating goods and services that we've purchased from outside the organization into our systems? Important concepts there. The value of outsourced goods, products, and services, timing, and the capability of the project team. These are all things that you should be looking at through this chapter. Planning project procurement is all about the process of documenting project procurement decisions, specifying the approach, and identifying potential sellers. Now remember, this is the planning process. So of course we need to know what our project needs. We need to know what we are able and capable of doing. And typically project procurement begins after the bulk of the project plan is complete, because really we don't know what we're going to need until such time as we've done all of our planning. Make-buy decisions, we talked about that, and we talked about some of the reasons why we want to make versus buy. Exhibit 12.2 is a good chart for considering some of those things. Now, some other things to consider when we do outsource our effort, whether we're buying goods or we're buying a service. There are some things that we need to be concerned about, some issues. We lose control of our schedule and our costs. We don't often, even though we may have a contract that says you'll deliver by a certain date, we may not be able to control that as well as we might like. And it's not uncommon for things to end up, for contracts to be renegotiated and things to end up costing more than we think they will. There's also the gradual loss of skills, special skills, when we start outsourcing a lot of work because it's faster or cheaper. Well, then the next thing you know, we lose the skills internally to do that kind of work. Loss of project focus and potential conflicts of interest, ineffective management as a result of complicated business interactions, and a loss of confidentiality, and double outsourcing when a third party is used. It is not uncommon for a contractor to subcontract, and sometimes we have issues. So it can compound all of the rest of these issues, as well as the issue of confidentiality can become a real problem. Contracts, it's important to understand the different types of contracts that are available for us to consider in project management. Fixed price contracts, fixed price plus incentive fees, cost plus incentive fees, cost plus an award fee, time and materials, just to name a few. Exhibit 12.6 does a good job of outlining these. And the key here is that every contract will benefit one party more than another, typically. So the thing that I like about Exhibit 12.6 is that it one party will assume more risk than the other, one will get more benefit than the other. And I like that it identifies cost risk is absorbed by the seller. So for example, at a firm fixed price contract, the seller, it says, I will do XYZ for $100,000. Great. Signed up. You are our person. And the next thing you know, the seller starts to engage into the work. And maybe they were going to make something, and it turns out that the cost of materials that they originally thought they were going to get something for a certain price ends up costing them double the material that they thought. Well, now they have to absorb that cost because they are in a firm fixed price contract. They have agreed to deliver XYZ for $100,000, and it doesn't matter if it ends up costing them more, because they don't, that's not part of the contract. So the seller assumes the risk, and it protects the buyer to some extent, because the buyer is going to pay a certain amount of money regardless. And then the other situations are things like time and materials is pretty much on the opposite end of that scale. When we contract time and materials with someone, well, we usually get an estimate, and that person will say, well, for 100 hours at $25 an hour, I will do XYZ. And we say, great, time and materials, boom, done. Well, we also assume, as buyers, we assume the risk here, because things could end up taking longer. Maybe it takes 200 hours instead of 100 hours. Well, that just doubled the rate at which we agreed to pay, but we agreed to pay time and materials, so it doesn't matter if it doubles. Now, often in time and material contracts, you'll see high-end clauses written into it. Well, time and materials not to exceed. You'll see a lot of that. Anyway, so it's important to know what contract is the best fit for what type of need. And then it's important to understand that we always have a bidding, a bid. We go out to bid, RFP, request for proposal, or request for bids, where we get suppliers that will send us their bid on what they will charge us to do whatever it is that we've asked them to do. Now remember that a contract is a mutually binding agreement that obligates the seller to provide a specific product or service and obligates the buyer to pay for it. That is a contract. So when we go into awarding contracts, we want to make really, really, really sure that the person who we've chosen is actually going to be able to do what they say they're going to do for the money they say they're going to charge. So we go through a selection process. We try not to always award to the lowest bidder, because sometimes that doesn't always work. So there are a lot of tools that may be used for the selection process, things like weighting systems and independent estimates, screening systems, seller ratings. How well are they rated? That can be huge. I mean, if they're not rated very well, or if they have a lot of Better Business Bureau problems, you might want to stay away from them, even if they've got the best price and are offering the best contract. Oftentimes expert judgment, and I'll also throw in here previous experience with suppliers is always a good gauge. And then proposal evaluation techniques, some control procurement process. So when we get to controlling the procurement, that's where we really want to make sure that we're collaborating and partnering with our suppliers. We want to team with our suppliers because we want to create a cohesive and collaborative project team. We want our suppliers to know that we are in it with them, and it tends to just create a much better relationship. And Exhibit 12.9 gives you some advantages for project partnerships, and why you might want to consider some of that. So that's Chapter 12 in a nutshell. Please don't hesitate to contact me and let me know if you have any questions. Take care and have an awesome